Before we get into content, just the term is, as you know, flying by. It always does. We have very fast semesters here. And so we're encroaching on time to think about your final papers. So I meant to have this as a anonymous Menti poll, but this is hopefully a safe-ish space. Just hands up if you've had a chance to start working on your final paper. I'm just curious. So we have a few. Actually, this is a trick question. Everybody has started working on their final paper already. If you did the pre-registration, right, part of my goal in that was not just to make you, suffer early on, but that you really have done almost half of your paper, even if you've done nothing since the pre-registration. So before you panic about this being due in about 2 weeks, do know you have started. But it is now time to turn back to that if you haven't already, and turn this into what will be your final paper. So I just want to take a couple minutes to sort of look at the instructions with you all. You may have looked at this already, but if you haven't, this will be a chance for us to talk about that a bit together, and you can ask some questions, and then we'll dig into content. So for that, I'm going to pull up. Why is that so small? I need to set you down because I need both hands. So on your final assignment page, how about you just sit right here and then you can't fall off. That was traumatizing for the class. He has no memory of that, but okay. So yeah, there's a lot of things on this page. And again, the goal is not to overwhelm you with that, but to give you a lot of tools to help you do really well on this, right? If you look at these documents, use the resources here, you can get a really high grade on this paper. That's my goal for you. I want you to do well on this. I'm not trying to like hide any secrets here or anything. So first, right, there's this, if you've seen before, this is the overview of like the whole assignment that we've been building up to. This is just the final part, but you can take a look back at this if you're like, oh, it's been a while, I've been busy, like what the heck were we doing anyway in the first place? Take a look at this again and remember, right, we were thinking about best practices in psychology, in personality psychology is really one of the key points of this assignment, right? That you started by stating your hypothesis ahead of time, so that now that we have this huge correlation table, you can't just cherry pick the correlation that you think is sexy now, right? You had to pick this ahead of time. And so whether or not your hypothesis is supported, you can still do awesome on this paper. It's not about whether you were right? There's lots of reasons why a hypothesis may or may not be supported, but we're trying to model that best practice of stating a priori ahead of time what you're looking for, right? You're looking for one association and creating a bit of background for that, right? And pre-registering that. And now you have your results and you're going to write that up. And so you're going to basically take that pre-registration and make it into the report. And so you can absolutely copy and paste parts of what you've done, use that, build on it. And so I'll say now about like what is different now as we move into the final paper, right? So these were the different parts. You did the participation, you did the pre-registration. I analyzed the data for you because this is not a stats class. I would love it if it was, but it's not. And then gave you that information that is posted there. And now you're going to write a pretty short paper that presents these results. And so then you've got the final paper instructions. And so this gives you information on like the formatting, all the boring stuff, but then it walks you through, right, an outline for your paper, right? So start here, use this as your outline, right? Last time you started with your hypothesis right up front, but now you're making this more of a paper rather than just a pre-registration. So you're actually going to start with your background, right? And your theory of why is this important, right? You're going to introduce the topic, your approach to personality, and why it relates to the outcome that you're studying, right? And so you're setting up the background for why you would look at this hypothesis, right? And then you go into your research review where you summarize some of the research that's been done on this topic. So use the study you talked about in your pre-registration, but now you can like cut right to the point, right? Last time we asked you to like say their hypothesis, explain all of their methods, then state their results, right? We were looking for a more detailed explanation of that study, in part because they wanted you to like practice finding all that information. But now you can sort of just get right to the point and say, you know, our research has studied this in cross-sectional studies and found this association. And another study followed up on that and replicated it, or didn't find that and found a moderator of that instead, something that you know, was an interaction, or right, you don't need to explain all of the details of each study, just the thing that really relates to what you're trying to say for your paper. Right, in the same way that when you read the textbook, for example, very rarely does funder tell you all of the details of a study that's supporting a point. He says things like, you know, this study had participants do this task and found this, right? And so just gets right to the point of, you know, how that supports the point he's making about, you know, why extroversion relates to seeking stimulation, right? And so now you can talk about a few studies, but less on each one, right? And more just directly, how does it relate to your hypothesis, right? You're really focusing on that piece of what you did last time of this study found this and it relates to my hypothesis in this way, right? And so making sure everything you talk about here is setting you up for this next step of, right, stating your hypothesis, right? You are explaining how this research relates to your hypothesis and then saying, and therefore, I hypothesized this, and let's then like see what we found. Setting that up, right? And I have the research and the connection to hypothesis as it'll listed as separate sections, but you can integrate those if you'd like, right? You can talk about a study and talk about how it relates to your hypothesis, or you could talk about a few studies and then talk about how all of those relate to your hypothesis, right? But as long as you have these pieces, right, then you're gonna do well on that part. Then you have your methods part, which is just straight from your pre-registration. I want you all to get full points on this part in the rubric, right? You can just make adjustments based on what your feedback was on the pre-registration and then take that, right? Because your methods haven't changed. That's the point of the pre-registration. If we changed our methods, that would be sketchy. We're like, oh no, we actually meant to measure it this way. So that should absolutely not change, except right if you're changing how you wrote it up. That's, of course, you can edit that. Then the results, and I'll show you, I have a template. You can just take your correlations, plug it into that, and report your results. So I would love for you all to get full points on that too. And then the other part of like the paper, right? The writing part is then the discussion, right? So did what you found support your hypothesis or not? Are there any reasons why that may or may not be the case, right? What if you didn't support your hypothesis? Right now you can kind of speculate a little bit on why that might be, right? This is a special population or sample of students. You're not the average. Maybe there's something different about U of T students from other studies that meant this didn't replicate, right? And so you can sort of speculate here on why you did or did not support your hypotheses. So, were your findings consistent with previous work? You can connect back to what you talked about in the introduction, right? It did support that, or it didn't, and you found something different, and maybe you have an idea why, or maybe that warrants future research. And then you just wrap up with a conclusion, include your references, and then finally is a short reflection just on this whole process. And there are some prompts for you to help you with that here. Rubric that follows that outline, but you can, I think this is helpful to see, right, how many points are allocated to each section, right? Ones that are worth more points, you probably need to write more about, right? But then there's these ones that are straight from what we've done last time. So make sure you get those points. But the key things are really this discussion and this background, sorry, and the research review and the theoretical background and the connection to your hypothesis, right? This is a paper, not just an analysis. So to plug in your results, right, you've got your massive correlation table, and it'll take you a second to find what you're looking for, but then you'll should be able to do that, right? So you'll find your personality variable down this side of the tables, and then your outcome variable, your dependent variable along the top, and they're in order that they were in that pre-registration, right? So you might have to scroll to one of the later tables to find yours, but they're all listed across the top. And so then your correlation is, if you're interested in like openness and life satisfaction, here's that correlation. R is 0.13. The p-value is 0.07. It's not quite significant, right? It's greater than 0.05. There's our p-value. And then the n just refers to how many people filled out those questions. You don't need to report that, but that's what the 197 is. 197 people responded to both of those questions, and so are included in that analysis. So then we would take those numbers and we will plug them into one of these. So this one didn't support my hypothesis, so I'll stick my numbers and variables into this paragraph, right? So this is a time where I'm saying you can copy and paste. This is not plagiarizing here. This is how you write something up in APA format. And so stick your R value and P values in there, and of course, update your variables as well, so it reflects your hypothesis. And then if you did support your hypothesis, if your P is less than 0.05 and it is significant, then follow this very similar template reporting the same information. And I've just commented on what the different things there mean. So that. And then lastly, you do have to talk about who participated in this study. And that information is here. So this is a example one. You'll need to swap in the correct information in it because this is, from a different study, but then here's our information. So you'll just put in the actual, how many, what was the age and gender and ethnicity of our sample. And so you can take those numbers and just plug them into this paragraph, right? And I know that this is a little bit tedious, but it is good practice and a good chance for you to, right, see what these look like in articles. This is what we do when we do studies. I make these tables and then plug this information in. And so again, this is a way to, earn some sort of low-hanging points here by just taking this, sticking it in there, and then sticking that in your paper. That's your demographics section. So those are all the things. Here again is an example of a past student paper with what they got, just with the small caveat that I adjusted points slightly since last semester just to reflect the parts that you do work harder on. So just note that there's a slight difference in this example in terms of how many points were for different things. And I switched it up a little bit this term. Yeah, question.
So that and in the relation section,
yeah, and so there are times where, right, people were allowed to skip items, and so those numbers may not be consistent, and that's okay. I love your attention to detail because this is that's good thinking, but that's why, right? So it means that of those 201, they might have skipped some of those ones, and so that's why that N is there, and so. Just go with what's in this document here. So this has the total number and the age, and so you can just plug that in. Yeah, question.
It's the strict again.
We basically stopped reading at the page limit. There was not like a deduction, but then that content doesn't get included, and so that is a deduction, right? Because then you don't get as many points in that last section. So go here and then there. Yeah. Great question. References are not a part of the page limit. If you include a cover page, which you don't need to do because all that information's on Quercus, that's a holdover from back in my day when we printed our papers. But if you do include that, that doesn't count. So just the like text of your paper counts. I'm gonna head there and then I'll come here. Yeah. Go for it. You can like, you don't have to have a separate heading for that conclusion, but just like do make sure like you wrap your paper up at the end. But you don't have to have like a heading for that if you don't want. Yeah, you had a question.
With the figures, afterwards, the page count then as well.
You don't need any figures, but if you did want to include a figure, then that would not count to the page limit, just because that would eat up a page immediately or whatever. Especially if you want your old professor to be able to see it. So, yeah, very few to nobody has come to at least my office hours to talk about this. And I don't know if that means that like you're all doing awesome or you just haven't had a chance to start with, but do feel free to use myself and the TAs as resources on this. And yeah, so that's what we're doing. I'll get back to your PowerPoints. I almost called myself Gordy. Wow, doing great. That's actually a great segue into object relations theory and how we separate ourselves from others and failures to do so and how they impact personality. So let's talk about that.